Here I am in beautiful Rappahannock County, Virginia, where I've just moved permanently, although I've spent a lot of time here. My parents lived down here after their retirement on this farm. Across the way there, that's a dairy farm. We're really growing grass this year. I mean, this is the lushest, greenest I've ever seen Virginia. Very heavy rain. I wanted to talk about Judith Butler. I'm doing this podcast, Peace Now, Great American Pacifist, and I'm going to finish with this book, The Force of Nonviolence by Judith Butler, which I'm still working my way through it. I think it's outstanding, though, and really interesting. Now, I guess I often quasi-endorse, almost endorse Judith Butler's account of gender. And people think this is ridiculous, okay? Like, I rarely get as severe an eye-rolling response as I do when I express sympathy with Judith Butler on gender. And it's amazingly unfashionable right now. I think probably people are speaking her name in a hush in academia right now as Trump, tries to censor radical views. I mean, I guess I see a lot of ridicule online and stuff for the idea that people don't know what a woman is and stuff like this, or, sort of social constructionist accounts of gender, of which Butler's is the most famous. And in some ways, at least one of the most thorough. She goes all the way with the account of gender as a social construction. That is so unfashionable now, where the gender binary is just being reasserted like mad, where we're trying to, Sydney Sweeney, the movie starlet, is some kind of badge or emblem of gender differentiation. Poor thing. I don't know, man. Like, it's so the gender binary is back. It's being reasserted. It's being reconstructed and reinforced. And Butler's in this position where her account of gender is disregarded as ridiculous. But okay, I have some sympathy. For one thing, I read the book in the early 90s, around 1990, or fairly soon after it came out, under the auspices of my lover, Judith Bradford, okay, who accounted herself a Foucauldian feminist. And Butler was a hero in that vein, a Foucauldian. She on Nonviolence is really great, okay? And it's not such a... This is another thing you often hear about Judith Butler, is that the writing is incomprehensible and shit like this. Well, not really. If you read a bunch of continental philosophy that is their basic sources, including Foucault, although Foucault's not that bad, it's not that bad. I don't think it's that bad. And this is definitely not a jargony, postmodern... there is postmodern jargon in here. Of course there is, in a way. But I don't think she's a bad writer. I think she's a good writer, overall. And I think that her account of gender is fundamental, man. And fundamentally important. And I'm glad it's out there, even if it's not strictly accurate. I don't know how to adjudicate that. All right. Well, all right. So let me say, first of all, I'm not going to go back and read Gender Trouble right now to do this video. I'd like to, though, but I have read it more than once and taught bits of it too. It is hard to teach undergraduates in some ways. It can be responsibly taught to undergraduates. This is obvious. This is some of the most important reflection on gender in the history of reflections on gender. All right, so famously, Butler's position, articulated with great subtlety in the full presentation, is that gender is a, quote, performance. Pretty soon, everyone was writing books about performing masculinity or performing masculinities and stuff like this. I mean, that was more like my vein, maybe. But if you tell people that their masculinity is a performance, like sort of a, I mean, she had in mind theater, a role you're playing with the scripts and costuming, all right, stage directions. A lot of guys are going to get really pissed off about that. No, I mean, my masculinity is totally natural, man, like effortless, okay? It's just who I am. In fact, everyone has lots of people have a lot of stake in their gender identity, okay? If they're not genderqueer, surprisingly, they have a big stake in their non-queer identity. That's not surprising at all, actually. That's one of the most basic features of human identity as we understand it is gendering. We've made it that way. It doesn't have to be that way, but we made it that way. Like one of the most conspicuous social identities or categories. All right, so people feel that you're attacking their femininity or their, and maybe even more, their masculinity when you say this is a performance. And then also, so one reason to get pissed off about that is that then the standard gender performance, like where I'm, just being sort of effortlessly masculine or whatever, I sort of still hope I am or whatever, this is what was offensive about this, I guess, to people. One thing. My gender performance of masculinity is just as much a performance, a role I'm playing that I learned how to play, as like sort of a gay set of inflections and gestures and everything, like a gay performance. So, I mean, even I thought this when I was first encountering Judith Butler, like, my thing is natural, but their thing is so artificial. Look at that. They're like, oh, like, wow, they talk like, they lisp or whatever. Not because they can't pronounce their S's, but because they're doing a gender performance. They're pretending to be women or something, is the way I probably thought about this. All right. Ineffectively, right, but, so if you say to someone like me, like a heterosexual who really did achieve a masculine identity and, or tried to, that there's nothing natural about your performance here, and it's just like those gay people who are very consciously performing gender. Now, you're performing it unconsciously, Sartwell, but that doesn't mean you're not performing it. Okay? And actually, I mean, I guess I want to say, like, it does feel pretty natural to me, but I remember learning it. I remember bits of learning it, okay? Like, it wasn't totally natural and just emerged. Like, I had to, I learned a whole repertoire of gestures and intonations and clothing styles and hairstyles and, from everywhere. From every source, from my parents' behavior, even though they were radical leftists and stuff, from the school, from TV, from everywhere the messages came, okay? And I think I learned to perform masculinity, okay? Now, I don't think I can stop, and I don't think I don't want to stop, really. I mean, I don't know, it is me or whatever, but I do think I'm performing it. Although it's an easy performance now because I've been doing it for 50 years or whatever, or 60 years or 70 years. All right, now, okay, so there's a couple things I want to say. So the idea is like, Butler collapses. You might not know this if you haven't gotten deep into this, but Butler collapses the sex gender distinction. Okay, she says that biological sex is also socially constructed and is also performance. Okay, so our biological sex is an attempt to naturalize or biologize the social performance that is actually gender. The biology is an ideology. Okay, it's an attempt to say like no, and one thing it's an attempt to do is say like this is not optional, like this is natural, this is instinctual, this would emerge everywhere wherever you find human beings, and so there's no point in trying to ameliorate or change it. So now Judith Butler got really, yeah, you should get suspicious of that. Like that's the way lots of hierarchies have been enforced, by being invented and then naturalized. Race is a great example, right? Like we invented it. I mean, you can see this completely, and let me say this again, like I always do. The child of a black person or a white person is a black person. Okay, that's an invention of race. It's not. It's not any fact. It's not any kind of biological fact. It's a social fact, and race is a social construction. All right. Now, these things, race and gender, are both artifacts of oppression, I would say, or at least to a large extent, to an interesting extent, they're artifacts of oppression. I mean, they might also be artifacts of resistance to some extent, right? Like the ways of being gendered or raced, or ways to wield gender and race might also come out of resistance to oppression. But the basic structural situation of black people and white people, say, third world people, first world people, men and women, is created by the oppression, and the social roles enhance, reproduce, enforce the oppression. Okay. So you ought to get suspicious, all right? And we should probably see how far we could get out of that. Do you know what I mean? Like let's try to see whether there are other conceptualities that will release us from this apparent biological destiny of hierarchy, or biological justification of hierarchy. So that's what Butler wants to do, is to see whether we can throw into doubt the naturalness of the gender binary, which reflects all this history of oppression. Okay, and that can be a liberatory technique, because we need release from gender, which encodes oppression at its heart. Okay, and these are Foucault type of ideas. They really are, I think. I think a big Foucault insight is that if it's socially constructed, that doesn't mean it's not real, but it does indicate that we could reconstruct. It brings hope in a certain way. It's like we are, we're not condemned to this. We invented it, and we can reinvent it. We invented ourselves, I mean, in these important respects, race, gender, etc. And we can reinvent ourselves. That's a moment of hope that Butler and Foucault were trying to bring into the 80s or whatever. Okay? So there are reasons to want to see how far gender can be treated as a social construction, because it's an oppressive situation in important respects. It's not only an oppressive situation. It's also a fun situation in lots of ways. It's also an erotic situation in lots of ways. And we might not want to get rid of gender, but I think maybe Butler's on this too. We might want to put it in play a little more, be able to play with it in a little different way. Right? I mean, the way gender is socially constructed as a binary, I think, has to do with being sexually attracted to your opposite, and then constructing ourselves as opposites, making men and women more and more contrasty. In reality, by dressing them up and forcing, or guiding them towards certain repertoires of gestures and certain professions and stuff like this, and okay, I don't know where I started that thought, but okay, Um, okay, so, and then making that all seem to be inevitable and biological or whatever. Now, I guess I just want to start out by saying, like, I do think that there are two genders. I mean, I do think there are two sexes, two biological sexes, roughly, with lots in between and stuff like this. And also I want to say, like, both are spectrums, okay? Probably, I mean, I don't know, hormonal, gonadally, stuff like this. But I do kind of eyeball that there are two kinds of people, all right? Roughly two kinds of people, all right? And it's an important biological difference. But the question is, to what extent is that biological difference reflected in social hierarchies, and to what extent does it have to be reflected in social hierarchies? All the ways that the genders interact now, are they biological or are they socially constructed? And I think a strong point of Butler's work is that she just presses on that point to the maximum degree. What would we think if we thought it was all socially constructed? Right. Let's experiment at least with that point of view. Let's take the biology out of it for a minute and think about the content of these things and how they could be changed and what they really mean. Let's release gender identity from biology and see whether that releases us from hierarchies of oppression. I think that's a worthwhile project. I really do, and I've sort of pursued it to some extent in my own way. So I guess what I want to say is, like, so give a considered. I can't think my way all the way through gender, and I don't trust myself to because I have such stakes in it, you know. But this is what I think. There are, like I say, there are roughly two biological kinds of people. How relevant that is another question. And then there's all this social stuff built on top of it. Okay? Like there's the biology, we're awfully similar biologically, overwhelmingly similar biologically, but maybe there are these biological differences. But the social differences are unbelievably vast and do much, much more than reflect the biological differences. Because the other view is just a justification of sexist oppression, right? That the social features of gender reflect the biology. Maybe some do and some don't, okay? But I'm wanting to experiment with seeing how far we can go with saying that the features that we easily naturalize of gender are socially constructed. Now, I think Butler's idea of performance is good, okay? Like that's a good way to start. And it makes you think about costuming, vocal intonations, okay? Scripts of even, whole paragraphs that you can say as a man or a woman that you would never say if you were the other, and stuff like this. Gender really is a performance in many, many ways. And I know people feel insulted to hear that they're performing gender. And I think almost everybody is, unconsciously for the most part, if they are not genderqueer. That's the whole thing about being straight, is your identity has to be unconscious. Like, I'm not conscious that I'm performing. Well, that's not that surprising because it's inculcated in you from, depends on where you're growing up and what little subculture or whatever. It's inculcated in you from before your birth, really. You know what I mean? Or maybe, or your gender reveal party. Right? So if I can't bring to consciousness all the ways I learned to perform masculinity, that's not surprising. And if I have a stake in thinking that I'm not performing at all, what are you talking about? This is just me. That's not surprising either. False though it is, I think. All right, but at any rate, so the good thing about this performance idea is it's an aesthetic concept. the idea is that we're creating an aesthetic self-presentation that is where the gender is. And I do think that the idea of performance, gender as performance, should be expanded to gender as an aesthetic repertoire. It's a set of visual cues. I mean, it has to do with the way you're decorating your environment. It has to do with the car you're driving, if you are. It has to do with, as well as the way you're walking and speaking. Like that's more directly performance. But the aesthetic, I want to think of much more broadly, gender as an aesthetic repertoire, or many aesthetic repertoires, okay? In your man cave, in your she shed, what do you like? The music you listen to. I've been through some musical relationships, right? Like, where she likes what she's like, and he likes what he's like. Right? Like, I've never been able to really get women going on roots music, like hardcore blues and country or something like that. But I mean, I'm not saying that, but that maybe codes masculine a little bit or something like this. I don't know. Or it codes naturalistic. The clothing we wear, like I say, the whole environment, the way we're decorating every bit of our environment, and the way we're compromising maybe with people in other genders to articulate an environment. Okay. So I think of gender as significantly an aesthetic repertoire, and I think that does a little better than performance in terms of pointing at the full range of gender expressions, okay? And also, and I think that Butler should like this, it de-individualizes. Like a performance seems to be like something that someone is doing, playing a role. But an aesthetic repertoire is a whole environment from which we're selecting and stuff like this, okay? And so I think it's worth saying that gender is, to a significant extent, there might be biological sex. And I don't know how much gender expression is determined by biological sex. Not that much, I don't think, actually. All right. But either way, it is embodied in aesthetic objects, environments, appreciations, self-presentations, and so on. Like what music you listen to matters. What kind of art you like matters, okay, in terms of your gendering, doesn't it? That truck you're driving, boy, or girl, right? Like that gives a gender message, doesn't it? Everything does. So, I think there might be such a thing as biological sex among human beings. I guess I think there is such a thing as biological sex among human beings, but I think that it doesn't determine much about our gendered behavior. But that gender as an aesthetic repertoire bids fair to explain a lot more phenomena in a way that is potentially transformable as well. Also, that's potentially at play. Okay, so I mean, just say like the aesthetic presentation of masculinity, it didn't used to include things like piercings. Right? Like if I'm wearing earrings in 1975, I'm getting gay bashed, and I did. But if I'm wearing earrings in 2015, they might, the right kind of earrings and stuff, they might read hyper-masculine. Okay, like athlete or, hip-hop star masculine, extremely masculine. Well, the aesthetic repertoires shift, and they shift rather remarkably rapidly, actually. And that could be fun, right? It could be fun to present yourself gender-wise in certain ways. You could play with how you're ornamented and how you're ornamenting your environment. And you could even consciously change your gender presentation by shifting your aesthetics and stuff like this. I think that's a hopeful, interesting approach, right? And I would be sympathetic to the idea of, like, at least for a moment, for some projects and stuff, let's just ignore this biological difference, man, and see how far and how much fun we can have with the aesthetic difference. And that's why I think the gender binary often leads to opposite aesthetics, where we're specifically trying to differentiate ourselves from one another, men and women, heterosexual men and women, right? So we're pretending kind of like we're to be really, really, really different. And I hate all your music. And the movies, am I going to watch another Jane Austen movie or whatever, all right, or whatever, okay. So, but I want to be that alienated. I want my partner to be, at least in part, an alien creature because my sexuality is configured around difference, okay? And so we're constructing all these differences, which are expressed aesthetically. And that is what heterosexuality consists in, day by day, is this aesthetic construction of the binary. All right, so I just thought I would do that without going back and reading a bunch of Judith Butler. And eventually I'll be doing a podcast episode on the force of nonviolence.